Thank you for joining me. My special guest today is Judith Rabinor. She is a doctor of psychology, and she wrote a book called Befriending Your Ex After Divorce, Making Life Better for You, Your Kids, and yes, your ex. And one of the reasons that I think this is such a great book and such an important contribution to books on divorce and kids is because I have been through 2 divorces. I've been through a bad divorce and a good divorce. And I agree with Dr. Rabinor that there is a way to have a good divorce and a nice relationship after divorce. So, Mia, are you a product of divorce or?
Well, my mom was, and my older sister was, and my sister's divorce was pretty bad because her husband left her for another woman, and that really hurt my sister a lot. I mean, it was a lot of anger, a lot of attacking. It was pretty bad. So I'm very curious to see how this turns out because I have not known anyone that's gotten divorced and they became, friends about it. That's really cool if you can do that because it's really hard on the kids when it's not. So
yeah, it really is. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you can think about, well, Judith will talk about this a lot as she does in the book, but if you can think about your kids first. I'm just always so shocked at how adults can put themselves before their kids and watch the negative impact on their kids. So we'll get to it. Thanks, Mia.
You're welcome.
Judith, thank you for joining me.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
This is a great book, and I mean, just right off the bat, just opening the book and seeing the, dedication to your ex-husband was just so touching. He, as you say in the book, he passed away as it was going to press. He must have been very pleased that, part of that this book was in part a product of your relationship with him.
Well, he was. And as a matter of fact, when I was writing the book and I wrote the acknowledgments, this is before he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. Mm-hmm. I wrote in the acknowledgments, I'm going to quote it, "This book would never have come to be without my befriended ex, Arnie Rabinor, with whom I co-created and lived a befriended relationship even before that term existed in my imagination." And then I went on to thank my children.
Yeah.
And then as the book was going to press, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and he had 10 weeks.
Oh, my gosh.
Exactly. And it was after he passed away that I thought I would dedicate the book to him. And I'll tell you, this was another chapter that's not in the book because the book was written about how really wonderful it was for my children that he and I had forgiven each other, had let go of all the animosity, and I could be there with them and with him at the very end of his life. And I could be there for my kids. And my kids are not little anymore. They're, in their late 30s. And my son is 41. My daughter's 37. So it's not as if these are little kids, but I think this is one of the messages of this book, that divorce is forever.
It is forever, and the impact is forever. And I just think that's so touching. In my book, The Critical Partner, I wrote about my ex-husband on the acknowledgments page. He's been really influential in my life. He's the good divorce I was referring to in the beginning of the show. My parents' divorce was the bad divorce that I was a product of, and he's meant so much to my development and my life, and he's now been in my life more than he's not.
Well, same with my ex.
And I think that it must have been so wonderful for your kids to know that you were grieving along with them. That it was a loss for you, too, when he died. That it wasn't like I see and hear some people who have such intense anger and hatred for their exes that they wish them dead.
Exactly. And, it wasn't always this way. When we first divorced, it wasn't so chummy. But
right.
I have to say that right off the bat, even though I felt a little icy towards him, just what you were saying in the beginning of the show, I knew that children do best when they have two parents who can get along and really be there for them and be steady, loving presences for them in their life. And to do that, parents have to be able to get along.
Right.
And I had to wrap my brain around the idea that I didn't have to be married to this man anymore. We were indeed divorced, but we were still parents and co-parents. And through being good co-parents together, which I'll talk about as, we go on, we've kind of rebuilt our trust and our respect for one another, and then we actually became way better friends. And by the end of his life, my mother had, when she was very, very old, developed dementia. And my ex-husband he was a lawyer, and he was very smart, and he went with me to the lawyer that I went to try to figure out how to handle her finances and all the different legal and medical issues. And I am remarried, but my current husband is a psychologist like me. This is not his area of expertise.
Right. None of ours. I don't know. That might be a prerequisite for being a psychologist, is that you're not smart about money and all of that stuff.
I know. I tell you so. Right. The first time I had a lawyer, but that wasn't good in other ways. And the second time I had a psychologist, that was good. That is good.
Right. I thought maybe he was a musician.
He is. He's both.
Oh, because you said in the book, thanks for all the music. And I thought, I guess he's a musician.
He
is. He's both.
He studied to be a concert pianist, and then at the last minute he decided he could never earn a living being a concert pianist, and he went and he got a PhD. And
that's hilarious. Of course, a lot of people quit the world of psychology because they don't feel like they can make a living doing it.
Exactly right.
So he was even helpful to you on that stuff. I've had the same experience with, my ex-husband. He's the financial guy. He's smart about that kind of stuff. I've gone to him on multiple occasions to help me out of situations and help me understand things. And it's nice that our kids know that we're helping each other and that there's a level of respect there. And, my kids are, my twin boys will be 21 this year and my daughter will be 17. They get it, and the kids get it from a young age. They don't have to be adults to get it.
Exactly.
And I think sometimes it can be harder when you're an adult. I was just starting college when my parents divorced, and it was devastating because of the way they handled it. It was just like scorched earth. It was War of the Roses. And so I don't think just because you've reached a certain age that it means that it's going to be easy on the kids. There was that whole school of thought like, wait until the kids are out of the house and then that's the right time to do it. But I think that's really a vulnerable time for kids. The late teens and 20s are really turbulent times, and it's a different kind of self-discovery period. And I think if you have your stable base destabilized, that it can really, throw you for a loop. And it can be really devastating. What did you hear that same type of thing from people as you were conducting your
interviews?
And
I'm doing a workshop in New York on a week from today, as a matter of fact, at the JCC. If any of the listeners out here have relatives or family in Manhattan.
Is it on your website, too? Because we'll direct people to your website. It's JudithRuskayRabinor.com?
Judith Ruskay Rabinor, PhD.
PhD.com, okay.
But one of the things I'm going to stress in the workshop, and one of the blurbs that I created on the flyer, is divorce. It's not divorce that damages kids. It's the way divorce is handled.
Right. And we have to take a short break. I want to talk to you about that more. I want to hear more about that when we come back from the break, because those studies that were conducted by, is it
Judith Wallerstein, yes.
Yes. I love that you mentioned that and about the whole guilty, parent thing. I want to talk about that because I never believed any of that. We're going to take a short break. You're listening to Relationships 2.0. My special guest is Judith Rabinor. She's the author of Befriending Your Ex After Divorce. You can do it. Listen. Welcome back to Relationships 2.0. Today I'm talking to Judith Rabinor. She's the author of Befriending Your Ex After Divorce. As we were going to break, we were talking about those studies that Judith Wallerstein did on the effects of divorce on children.
One thing that I think is really important is we are living in a different era. Judith Wallerstein, she passed away recently. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
She did. I've been following her career because, honestly, she left me with such a guilty feeling after I got divorced. And I don't think I could have written this book unless I felt like that my children, who at the time I started it were in their 30s, really had their relationships and their 2 feet on the ground, because I lived for so many decades with the feeling that I had really injured them by getting divorced.
Yeah. Well, I remember when her studies came out, she was in Marin.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and so, we were living in Marin at the time. I live in San Francisco now, but, it was big. It was widely distributed in the area. So I was aware of it, as if we didn't need another scarlet letter to bear as you're going through that kind of, period in your life, such a major transition. So your kids have their feet on the ground. They are capable of healthy relationships, and you must have also had some evidence that wasn't just of a personal nature, but maybe a professional nature, that people were coming out of it, unscarred.
The world is different than the world that Judith Wallerstein lived in. Divorce has become practically an expectable stage of life. It's just a reality now.
Do you think that, and let me ask you about that, do you think, because I always think, when people used to get married for life, people lived to be like 40.
Exactly.
A lifetime was a lot shorter than what it is now. So if someone's getting married at 30, you're basically saying if, the expectation is you're going to stay together for the rest of your life, that you're going to be together for 50, 60, 70 years.
Exactly.
That's a long time.
That's a very long time.
I love the notion of, being able to weather the storms and all of that kind of stuff. But I love the fantasy of that. But I think that I don't know if it's realistic. What do you think?
Well, I think the data says that it isn't. 1 out of every 2 divorces fails, and when that statistic came out, it was kind of horrifying. But now it's become the new normal.
Right.
I hear over and over again that nursery school classes are filled with, parents who are divorced.
Mm-hmm.
That this isn't an exception. Just in 2 or 3 generations, it's become the norm.
Right.
And I do think that people get married today with the feeling, if it doesn't work out, I am not stuck.
Right.
I'm not stuck. I can get a divorce. And they've seen divorce, and I think people ask me this question now, well, when I grew up, people all hated each other who got divorced, but there are more and more people who are managing to make a go of creating what I call extended, expanded families.
Yeah.
And I start my book with a Thanksgiving where a married couple who are previously divorced, have a Thanksgiving, and they invite their exes and their exes' children, and you have children from column A, column B, and column C, and all sorts of extended relatives.
Yeah, it's like a crazy blended family, right?
crazy blended family, and I think people are really recognizing that because when you get divorced, if you're 40, if you're 30, and you have sister-in-laws and brother-in-laws and all sorts of relatives that you've developed a 10, 15-year relationship with, why does this have to all disappear and evaporate?
Right.
Why can't everybody really be together? And it's so much better for the kids, and it's ultimately so much better for the parents. You know, I don't know about your particular situation, but in so many situations, and I tell my own clients this is the parent of your children, and even if you remarry, there's no guarantee you're going to remarry. There's no guarantee that marriage will last. There's no guarantee that person will get along with your children. But fostering a good relationship with your ex is going to inure to the benefit of your children in spades.
No one is going to love your children like their other parent. You know, as much as you do. I mean, in some cases, so there are bad parents, and you talk about that in the book. I mean, for some people, this isn't going to work. If you're, you know, if one of the people is abusive or addicted to drugs or alcohol and not seeking help, then you have a different situation. But let's say we're talking about normal, high-functioning people, then there isn't anyone who loves my children as much as their dad.
Exactly.
And there isn't anyone who has their best interest at heart more than he does. So he's the perfect person to co-parent with.
Exactly. And I always knew that in case of an emergency, that my husband would be there, my ex-husband would be there in a minute.
Yeah.
And I felt I could call him about any problem with the children, and we really did raise them together.
Yeah. And we did too. And he's remarried. I'm not. But you know, when I have to put down, like, you know, on something serious, like closest relative to call, I put him down.
Yeah.
Because I know that even if he only cares about me based on the fact that I'm the mother of his children, that he's going to show up for that because he loves his children so much. So, you know, I just so much appreciate all of the effort that you put into this book. And I want to get to some of the content of it because it's really important. It's really an important contribution. People need to, you know, deal with this hurt that they've experienced separate from their kids and that, you know, and the co-parenting of them.
Well, you know, that's one of my main points, that if people can get their egos out of the way and say, we got divorced. It doesn't really matter whether he was the initiator, I was the initiator, whose, quote, fault it was. But kids do best when they have two involved parents, and I'm going to make that a priority.
Yeah.
I put all my other issues on the side, and I'm going to include him in every way I can, and I'm going to collaborate with him in any way I can. And, you know, many people think, all right, now I'm divorced, that I'm going to be the best parent I can be. But they don't realize that being the best parent you can be means involving the other parent.
Yeah.
It's really keeping the door open and defending that other person and protecting that relationship for the benefit of your children. So often it's so tempting. I mean, I hear in my office all the time, someone will tell me, I told the kids that their father didn't send the money, so we don't have money for them to go to take piano lessons or go to skating or do whatever it is.
Yeah.
And, you know, I encourage my clients, I say to them, treat your ex the way you would have if you had stayed married. If your ex didn't make enough money or didn't do what he was supposed to do, you would have said, let's take our time and see what happens. He'll pay. If your ex had a temper tantrum, you wouldn't say, look at Daddy. He had a stupid temper tantrum. You would say, all people lose their patience sometimes.
Right.
All people get angry. You know, your dad really loves you, so just let's get over it.
Well, I have to tell you, I have stopped dating several men because of, you know, the stories that they would tell about their exchanges with their ex-wives who they have children with. And I would just think to first I'd say something like, you know, this is the mother of your children. you love your children, right? But then my other thought was, wow, if he's treating the mother of his kids this way, this does not bode well for me.
Exactly. And it's
this is not a good relationship pattern.
And it's interesting that you bring this up because somebody asked me recently, well, I like what you're saying and I know that I want to meet somebody, and get remarried, but what do I do if the person I meet isn't interested in me befriending my ex and if they're too jealous and they don't like their ex? I say that's a red flag. Take that seriously. Take that seriously because he's telling you something very important about who he is as a person, and it probably isn't going to change.
Right. He's too insecure. And again, I've had a couple of men who have been completely jealous, even though, as I said, my ex-husband is happily remarried. We don't have that kind of relationship. There's nothing inappropriate about our relationship at all, but just that jealousy because I don't have anything nasty to say about him, quite the opposite. I have lovely things to say about him. Why wouldn't I? He is the father of my children, and we have lovely children that we've raised together. So it's definitely interesting to use that as a weeding out process. Unfortunately, it gets rid of a lot of people.
Right, that gets rid of a lot of people.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully, not after, hopefully people will get their hands on your book and turn their lives around. We're going to take another short break. You're listening to Relationships 2.0, and my guest, Judith Rabinor. She is a doctor of psychology and the author of Befriending Your Ex After Divorce, Making Life Better for You, your kids, and yes, your ex. We will be back right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Relationships 2.0. My guest today is Judith Rabinor. She is the author of Befriending Your Ex After Divorce. One of the things that you mention in your book is the process of grief and grief in all of this. The grief of, you're losing your marriage and your partner and all of that. And it really struck me because last spring, one of our dogs died, and it was the first time as an adult that I've experienced, like the death of someone, and I was with him when he died, and I cried so much. I mean, I really couldn't stop crying for, every day for a couple of months, and I was thinking, my God, I haven't cried this hard. And then suddenly I remembered, wow, I haven't cried this hard since I went through the divorce, because it is such, and it wasn't just like, cry for a day, or it's just a whole process. It goes on for a while. I almost think that people are temporarily insane for a period of time when they're going through that, because it's so traumatic.
Well, I completely agree with you, and this is another thing that really needs to be taken into consideration. That divorce is a tremendous wrenching process for adults, and for children. And even when the adults want it, it is usually more wrenching, more devastating than they had anticipated. And
because they're not throwing plates at each other and, saying horrible things. I mean, the civilized divorce can be even more traumatic in some ways, right?
Exactly. And so I think that having your priorities focused on the needs of children is both difficult and crucial.
It saved me.
Exactly. Well, that's right. It saved you because it gave you a focus. It gave you
and a purpose that was
stability in
kind of outside of myself.
Everything was changing.
Yeah.
Everything was changing. And but for some people, they get too wrapped up in being angry, being bitter. They're afraid to grieve. And I like your story about your dog, that people have to allow themselves to feel the pain. And even if the divorce was ultimately a good decision for parents, one, it still is going to involve grief, because people get married not thinking they're going to get divorced.
Yeah.
So it's a loss.
No, I mean, I highlighted that page in your book. It's page 48 where you talk about, you know, like friends and family giving these all like get over it messages and things like just get on with it. Keep a stiff upper lip. If life, you know, gives you lemons, make lemonade. And that, you know, people tell us things that are, you know, cues for us to avoid painful emotions when that's what we need to not be avoiding. We need to face those and process them. And you have, you know, a fabulous chapter on that. I mean, I think this is, you know, just so well laid out, the way that you take everyone through this process.
Well, and it is a process, and it takes a long time, and there are many, many things that trigger, you know, grief over and over again. I mean, the first year of divorce, the holidays that people spend without their children, they're devastating. And that's another reason, having this new model where families really can remain families. They're a different kind of family. It's like, as I said before, the new normal.
Right. Well, we spent, I mean, for the first several years, we spent holidays together still.
That's wonderful. And for me,
and I think that helped a lot with the kids. I mean, we even lived together for a while, and, you know, still had like family dinners and that kind of thing. I think it was, you know, it was, I guess, a way for us to go through the process, you know, as gently as possible as well. You know, another thing that struck me in your book was this, you know, idea of embracing a new vision, like befriending, and you say befriending your ex hasn't gotten as much press as remaining enemies. And I was thinking, yeah, I mean, we're lacking role models out there. And every time there is a couple who seem to be doing it well, everyone's like, oh, they must be hooking up, or they're going to get back together. It can never just be that they're, you know, treating each other with respect and behaving well. It's not being treated as something that people should model themselves after. There has to be some other, you know, kind of motive behind it or something else going on.
Well, you know, I'm loving this interview with you, Michelle, because sometimes I get interviewed by people who say, how is this possible, and how is it possible to be friends with your ex, and what about if you're sexually attracted, and isn't that the reason that exes get back together? And it's hard to explain that there really is possible to just start a new kind of relationship.
Yeah. Where
you're there because of the kids. And then this is kind of another more complicated part of my message, that if you really feel that your ex is a great parent, you can feel very close to them. And you can, just what you said, you can put their name down on your emergency list because you know they really would be there for you. But that doesn't mean you're hooking up. And it doesn't mean you have,
you have designs on it.
It doesn't mean you have that kind of chemistry between you.
Right.
It just means you've developed a friendship.
Well, and it's, you know, it's an extension of family, right? I mean, isn't it really about kind of, you know, at least keeping the supportive, emotional aspects of the family together in a way?
And you can think about it that way. You know, you can have a cousin who you're really crazy about, but that doesn't mean you have, you know, a sexual connection to that person.
Right. Yeah. I think that it's still difficult for people to get over the notion that a straight man and woman can be friends and can be friends and not, it doesn't mean they're having sex. You know, I think everyone, you know, this belief that if you really get along well with a member of the opposite sex, then you must
always turn into a sexual connection.
Right. And so tell me one of your most, like, uncomfortable situations in your office with someone coming in going through a divorce. Because obviously you have, you know, great connection to what is important for the kids.
I'll tell you what's the most, you know, among uncomfortable things, but this comes to my mind. a guy that I'm seeing now, and I'm not even seeing him about his divorce. I'm seeing him about his weight.
Mm-hmm. He's overweight?
He's overweight, and so that's how he started to come see me, because before I wrote this book, I wrote another book on eating disorders.
I know, and I want to, after we finish this, let's talk about that for a second, because I just want to talk about your transition. But, okay, so he's seen you about weight.
And, but anyway, in talking about, and he's in a group that I run, I see him individually and in a group, and he's talking about his ex-wife, who he divorced 20 years ago, and he is still paying $5,000 a month alimony, and this is, the children are all grown and married. Okay, this is alimony, old-fashioned alimony.
Right.
And the people in the group were like horrified, and they said to him, "You have to go back to court. This is completely ridiculous." And he said, "You know, if I go back to court, the kids are going to be so mad at me, because he has created a good life to himself. And she is still angry, bitter, and telling stories about what went wrong in the marriage and what's wrong with him. And so he would like to, you know, get along, and they could all go to holidays together, because they've had many things. They've had to be present at the births of grandchildren, at weddings of their children, and it's always highly uncomfortable. And he says, I wish she would get over it, and we could just celebrate these things together, but she's uncomfortable. She makes the kids uncomfortable. She makes my wife uncomfortable. Now my wife doesn't want to go to these things. And the group that he's in, that I'm running, really encouraged him to reach out to her. He wrote her a letter, and the letters he got back from her were diatribes about how she could not forget what happened, and she could not forgive him, and that chapter was never going to go any further than it is. And so what is left for him is to accept that this is who she is. And he said, this is why I divorced her. This is what she was always like.
Right.
You know, she just doesn't have a very big heart. She has never worked. And that also has not inured to her benefit. I mean, getting this...
She never gets outside of herself.
She's never gotten outside of herself, and she's still writing long letters about what's wrong with him and the things he did, and the way she got gypped when they did this, that, and the other thing. And so that's really a horrible story for me. Yeah. That sometimes people just have to accept that the train stops here for now.
Well, and then he has to process that negative message. I mean, do you think that is related at all to his weight?
That's a good question. It's a good question. I think
emotional eating
problem is more complicated than that. It started as a child, and it started with a whole lot of things that happened in childhood. But having to swallow this bitter pill, it's a bitter pill some people have to swallow, that they can't budge the other person.
Yeah.
And as much as he changes, I mean, on the other hand, I'll tell you a good story, okay?
Yeah.
Because in interviewing people for this book, I called people. I was once in a group after I got divorced. It was a joint custody group, because that's what I had with my ex. And this woman told me a story about how when she and her ex got divorced, he hated her. And she had actually left him for another man, and he couldn't stand her. And two of them kind of went their separate ways. And as fate had it, she took her mother to the emergency room one night, and who was sitting in the emergency room but him and his mother in the hospital? And the two of them sat there with their mothers in the emergency room. And eventually, they found their way back to one another, to just being friends and being supportive. Yeah. And in fact, when her mother passed away, he came to the funeral. He was there for the kids, and they really reclaimed a friendship. They renewed their relationship, and they forgave each other. And he said, I don't care what happened 20 years ago.
Oh,
so, I mean, people ask me, is it ever too late to befriend your ex? And the answer is no.
No.
Life always gives
never
new opportunities to grow.
It's never too late. This book is so important. We're going to take another short break. You're listening to Relationships 2.0. My guest is Judith Rabinor. Her website, by the way, is Judith Ruskay, Ruskay, Rabinor, Rabinor, PhD.com. Check it out. Sounds like everyone should go to one of your groups. We're gonna take
I know, I'd love that. I'd have a lot of fun running them.
We're going to take a short break. You need to come out to California and run some of the groups out here. We have problems out here. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to Relationships 2.0. I'm Michelle. My guest today is Judith Rabinor. Sorry about that. She's the author of Befriending Your Ex After Divorce. So I love the great stories and the happy stories, but I think about, our society today and what's out there, what people are watching. Wow, people are obsessed with reality TV and train wrecks. They like the nastiness. I mean, I should say we like the nastiness. Obviously, we as a society like seeing these, the cat fights on Bravo, on the, housewife shows, and there are other shows I don't even know about. I don't know, there's the Honey Boo Boo somewhere, and, there aren't good role models. I think it's really important that literature like yours, that there be more literature like yours to offset some of this.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, I write for the Huffington Post, and one of the pieces I'm drafting right now is, are you addicted to X? I have a column. It's called Befriending Your Ex, but I got the idea from, the interviews I've been doing and the radio shows I've been on. Like, I'm going to write a column called Are You Addicted to Ex Bashing? Because it feels like there are so many people who are just loving bashing their exes instead of getting on with their lives.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that, when there's so much to distract people, it becomes even more difficult for people to take time to go through this self-awareness process. And, some of these tips that you give in the book and things like mindfulness. And if people really practiced some of these things that come out of positive psychology and mindfulness and compassion for yourself and others, I don't think there would be as much bashing going on.
I know. I mean, it makes me think I'm certainly not a Freudian, but I think about, aggression. And divorce is an opportunity for people to be aggressive and antagonistic and bash.
Yeah.
Person who they once vowed to love forever. It's really pretty daunting to think about it, right?
Yeah.
That divorce is one of these situations where it feels like it's okay for people to be mean.
There's permission, yeah.
Permission to tell a story about your ex. And, I tell people in my office, if your ex, it's your job to really help your child. It's not only your job to be a good parent, but to help your child have two good parents.
Yeah.
And
absolutely. You need to build them up, not tear them down.
Right.
It's so interesting because I have just listening to you talk about that, I have a very visceral reaction because when my parents were going through their divorce, the stuff that they each told me about the others, I mean, I wish I could burn it out of my brain. It's stuff that no one should know about their parents. It's just such nastiness and such intimate stuff that if it was someone who you loved, you would never share that kind of stuff. But suddenly, there's this mudslinging going on. Oh, let me tell you why we're not together, because he's this bad. She's this bad. She did this, she did. And you know what? In the end, they both look bad. Neither of them is better than the other. They're just different. And it didn't help anyone. And it only hurt and broke up an entire family. And honestly, if I hadn't, several years later, met my husband and had a relationship with him that was based on, unconditional love and support and mutual respect, I don't know where I'd be in the relationship world or where I'd be in the world, because that was not a great way to have, you know, my nuclear family, you know, my family of origin end.
Exactly. And, you know, people do things when you said, like, divorce brings out the cruelty, the insanity in people.
Yeah.
And parents must know that it is not good to reveal all their secrets to their children, and yet this is a common thing that we hear in our offices, correct?
Yes.
Parents tell their children the reason you're not going to camp this summer is because Daddy didn't send me the money.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it's horrible.
It's horrible.
And they don't know how to, I mean, even as a young adult, frankly, I wasn't prepared to process the messages I was getting. And certainly if you're dealing with kids, you know, young children, adolescents, they just feel torn. You know, there's such a loyalty pull, and I think that there's no way that a kid can feel like they can ever win in that. So if that's the kind of divorce that Judith Wallerstein's talking about, then of course it's damaging. But another thing that I want to touch on is that, you know, I always felt like, you know, I see people who are still married, who are really nasty to each other, who argue, who have clear contempt for each other, and the children are witnessing all of this. Now, there's no way you can tell me that the kids are better off that parents like that are together than if they were separate.
That's completely true. And she did not say that. She said she disagreed, because I read before writing this book, I read all of her research over and over again, and she said that the children, it's better when the parents stay together.
No matter how bad the marriage is, it's still better.
Well, she said, I guess that there were certain circumstances that not.
Oh, I think she said, I mean, I think it had to do with, like, physical abuse and that kind of thing. But it wasn't, that's where I thought she was just all wrong, you know. But, you know, we have these ideas that if people are together, that they're cohabitating nicely, and if they're divorced, they're mudslinging.
Right, exactly.
So based upon those, oh my God, I just noticed that my book is in the back of your book. A photo of my book. I have your book in front of me. But if you're going based on
your book is in the back of my book.
A photo of my book is in the back of your book.
Oh, yeah.
The critical part. Did you see it on the top? Isn't that funny?
That's fabulous.
I'll have to send you a copy of my book, Judith.
I would love you to. I would, you know, I
have that. We had the same editor. Nelda did mine too.
Yeah. That's great.
Nelda was,
you know, I'd love to do a workshop with you. I am coming to San Francisco for a week.
When?
In June, because we'll talk about this off the air,
perfect.
Okay?
Yeah, email me. Let's plan something. I'd love to see you.
That would really be fun, because
that would be fabulous.
Yeah.
I'm definitely around, and, why don't we, you know, if you're around on a Tuesday, we could do another show together in person.
Okay, well, let me see. I have to see. I'm coming out to a family wedding, so I have to see how all the details tell.
Terrific. That sounds great.
Okay.
So tell our listeners about the workshop that you're doing. Is it this coming weekend?
Yeah, I'm doing a workshop on Tuesday. That's a week from today.
Okay.
At the JCC in Manhattan, and I have some other workshops scheduled. You can look on my website and see them under events. And I'll just be talking to people about these concepts. And, you know, I do run a therapy group for people getting divorced, and I'm always really encouraging people to try to befriend their ex, to try to see that life doesn't have to be all horrible after you get divorced. You know, one of the women in my group, she told everybody that we just had this horrible hurricane here, and she had no electricity, and her ex had a generator. And he said, come on over. He had the children that week. He said, come on over, and she went and lived at his house for the week because he had a generator, he had electric and heat. And that's really how it should be.
That's how it's supposed to be. Yeah.
That's how it's supposed to be, but it's not always that way. And people can hardly believe it, because sometimes people get so stuck in the old way, and they're getting all kinds of secondary gain out of just remaining stuck in their anger.
Stuck in their anger, playing victim. Unfortunately, I think bad behavior gets a lot more attention than good behavior. And
we want to change that, right? We want
it books like this that have to change that. We're out of time. Judy, this has been so great. I hope to see you in June. Email me. Your book is fabulous. Everyone should go out and get this book, Befriending Your Ex After Divorce, Making Life Better for You, Your Kids, and Yes, Your Ex. You've been listening to Relationships 2.0, and you can find out who's on my show next week by going to michelleskeen.com.